Well, y'all, turns out there's high levels of lead in our protein shakes, according to a recent consumer report. Lead. This lead right here. Yes. So overall, there were 23 protein powders that were tested, and nearly all of the plant-based products that were tested nearly had 9 times the amount of lead contamination in them than dairy protein products. However, they are still considered safe to drink because the concentrations are low enough to not cause immediate harm. However, you know, extended exposure to lead, and especially in those high concentrations, especially the ones at the top of this video that said to avoid, can lead to immune suppression, kidney damage, and high blood pressure. And the kidney damage is the biggest one because kidneys are typically how we get contaminants out of our bodies. Now, not everything that they tested was bad for consumption. There were also good ones that were underneath the quote unquote recommended allowance of daily exposure to lead. So they asked the manufacturers a lot of these plant-based proteins where we see high lead concentrations for comment. They said that the lead in their products is naturally occurring. Now, there might be a little truth to that because of the environmental exposures that gets into our soil and into our water, and that soil and water is taken up by the plants, especially the pea plants that they use for protein powders, and then we see it a little bit in our daily lives with our meats and any of our proteins that we see because the cows or the pigs that we eat or the chickens that we eat, their feed comes from grass, soil, grain, things of that nature. So there's a little truth to that, but the amount of exposure that we see or contamination that we see in the plant-based products is quite high. Now, I will say, just as a scientist who does research quite a bit, it's kind of my life. I will say, when reading this article, you have to be careful and read within the lines. And what I mean by that is when they talk about the daily use and when they talk about, oh, people shouldn't be taking protein shakes for supplementation, they're talking about the average person, right? They're not talking about people who work out. They're talking about people who don't necessarily go to the gym as often as, say, me or some of my followers do, right? So I did a deep dive on whether or not there was research out there on how these heavy metals might be affecting physically active adults. And it turns out that there's been several studies showing that heavy metals are excreted through sweat and urine after strenuous physical activity. So overall, know what you're intaking into your body and know how it affects your body, especially if you are a more physically active adult or someone who is more sedentary, because those things make a difference.